and Anti-Racism Subcommittee meeting, excuse me. And I'm Abby Rubin, and my co-chair Shayna may or may not join us a little bit later because she has a family orientation for Bala Cynwyd Middle School. So she might be joining a little bit later, but I'm going to just hand this right off to Miss James Coles.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Women's History Month. March is also, we have the March Madness, and tonight our conversation is on SEL and DEIB. This March also marks SEL Month, National SEL Week, and SEL Day. SEL stands for Social Emotional Learning. And last year, my first year in the district, I had the honor and privilege of going to a lot of committee meetings and community meetings during my list. And a lot of people talked about social emotional learning in our students, and it was something that we was intentional about planning and making sure that we would discuss it in March. Since it is National SEL Month, and how the two intersect with how SEL intersects with equity. So this meeting is in response to some of the questions we've had from the community, and I'm happy that we have members of our student services team who will be presenting tonight with me, Mr. Rich Marta and Dr. Lauren Walker, and they'll share some of the work that we've been doing in Lower Merion. And there'll be, at the end of this presentation, an opportunity for you to have chat about the presentation, as well as ask questions about the presentations. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yanni, who is going to share a little bit. He's going to welcome you and share a little bit about our belonging survey.
Thank you, Ms. James Coles and Mrs. Rubin. As Shawana just said, we have recently completed our belonging survey. We provided a very high-level overview of the results at the board meeting on Monday night as part of my superintendent's report. By the end of this week, on making practices public, we're going to release all of the data and some of the strategies that we're doing to improve the sense of belonging in our students and staff, specifically looking at, let's say, for example, we have about 90% of our students and staff that feel a strong sense of belonging at school. And one of the things I said during the board meeting is that's great, but I'm worried about that 10% of students and staff that don't have that sense of belonging. And so a lot of the work that we'll be doing will be determining how we can make improvements there. So that information will be up on the website. When we think about belonging, we know that when students and staff feel good about being in school, that they feel like they belong, they feel like they matter, we know that creates better conditions for good, strong academic outcomes. And one of the things that we'll be talking about in future months are the very clear, measurable strategies and processes we'll be putting in place to continually increase academic outcomes for students. Thinking a little bit down the line, there are some spots on our website that talk about belonging and a number of things related to DEIB, and those pages will be updated in the coming weeks with information from our most recent belonging survey as well. So step one, by the end of this week, making practices public, you'll be able to see the information. And then, as we go through the spring, several other portions of our website will be updated as well. So overall, generally pleased with the results of our belonging survey, but we know there's always work to do. But, I was talking with someone earlier today and I said, at the end of the day, we want every student and staff member to feel that they have a sense of belonging, and we want everyone to treat everyone else with dignity and respect. And if we kind of keep that at the forefront of, what we're doing and what we're talking about, I think we'll be able to have a measurable impact on that sense of belonging across the district. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yanni. Dr. McGloin, would you start presenting the slide deck? At this time, we're going to introduce Mr. Marta, and he's going to talk a little bit about, give an overview of our student services team. So if we can get to advance to that slide. And Miss Kimberly Frazier is not with us this evening, but she supports us 110%. So this has really been a nice collaboration between the Office of Equity and Compliance and the Student Services team. Next slide, please, Dr. McGloin. Mr. Marta.
Yes, thanks, Shawana, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this information with the viewers and the board tonight. As part of our student services team, Kimberly Frazier is our director, and then myself and Dr. Walker, who's going to be also a presenter this evening, or team members, along with other people such as our school psychologists, the other school counselors, our school nurses, the mental health and wellness counselors that we contract with, and the school social workers, as well as the special education teachers and staff. They are all members of the student services team that serves all of our students throughout the district, K-12 plus. Next slide.
So we don't want to just do a stand and deliver. So there'll be a couple of times that we'll have some interaction. And then as I said, if you jumped on late, that there'll be an opportunity. We'll break into some small groups. Our meeting is from 7 to 8. So there'll be time before we end our meeting to go into some breakout groups and have some conversations about the presentation and talk about how we can move this work forward. But the first thing I would like to do is ask you, what color are you feeling right now? So you can think I want everyone to think of a color, and then I'm going to ask you to write the color, but don't, and for the chat, but do not press send yet, okay? So I want you to write it. How are you feeling? What color are you feeling right now? We know that colors have meanings, and sometimes the meaning affects how we're feeling, and how we're associating the different colors. Colors evoke emotions. And since we're talking about social emotional learning and our social emotional health and wellness, I want you to think of a color right now. Did everyone get a color in mind? Did they start writing? So I'm going to give a 3, 2, 1. And then when I say 3, 2, 1, then I want you to press send. So in the chat, let me put my color. All right. So 3, 2, 1, everyone press return. 3, I didn't get to 1 yet. So we have a nice range of our colors from our color feelings. And I'm going to tell you what some of these colors may mean. So we have Ms. Buckman is gray, Mr. Marta, beige, Ms. Rubin is orange, Luis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is green, Dr. McGloin is green, Ali Lou is blue, Sophia red, I'm pink, Nikado, please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your names incorrectly. Green, orange, red, green, turquoise, teal, and red. So if you have blue, blue evokes feelings of peace and calm and trust and confidence and loyalty. Green is a symbol of health, tranquility, growth, generosity. Purple, luxury, power, ambition, creativity. Red is a symbol of passion, excitement, energy, and confidence. Pink, love, kindness, innocence, femininity. Orange, success, enthusiasm, warmth, determination. Yellow, hope, optimism, positivity, and joy. Gray, elegance, authority, knowledge, and dignity. Brown, nature, security, strength, and dependability. Black, power, formality, rebellion, mystery. White, purity, safety, knowledge, and goodness. So hopefully some of those adjectives help that I just listed may be true in what you're feeling. So this is just something that teachers may do when they're checking in with their students, when they're coming in the beginning of the day. So we want to always be in tune with how we're feeling. So thank you for participating in that small little activity right there. Next slide, please. So you might be thinking like SEL, DIB, why are we talking about them? So SEL, DIB is a presentation. The CASTLE framework is a organization that talks about a lot of social emotional learning, and they have a framework. DEIB is something that we've really been proud of the work that we're doing here in Lower Merion. So when we think of SEL, our social emotional wellness, it is a tool that we use in our environments to help us to cope. DEIB is the experiences that we bring with us. So I like to have a lot of positivity and joy around me. So I have to have coping mechanisms that's going to help me promote those things. And one of the reasons I try to be joyful is a personal reason for me. My grandmother always talked about having joy. So I bring that awareness of her with me when I'm trying to be joyful in all situations, because she would always say, find the joy in everything. It makes us who we are. So DEIB together helps our educators and helps us as even as individuals get in touch with our whole selves. So that emotional piece plus the experiences is why we're bringing DEIB and SEL together. It helps us foster a greater sense of belonging. It promotes positive relationships with students, teachers, while helping us teach self-regulation, how we keep to ourselves, how do we socialize with others, and it brings awareness to all those things in our environments. Next slide, please. So CASEL also has information on DEIB and why should we have these two together. It helps us to support authentic school and community partnerships. And we always talk about how we work together. And that's one of the reasons we really love the partnerships that we have in Lower Merion, our families, our communities. We're working together so that we can create and improve strategies and programs to make Lower Merion the very best it can be for our students and your children, your families that are here with us. So it's helping us with relationship building and how we're communicating effectively. And sometimes maybe we're not doing a good job of communicating, but all of this, we're a work in progress. It helps us foster trust and collaborative relationships. Today, when we were at the CARE meeting, we talked a little bit about trust and relationships. This is how we can attune into and appreciate our students' needs, their backgrounds. We come together, we learn what makes them happy, what makes them sad. We learned how to practice empathy, thinking about different perspectives and learning active listening and building again those connections with one another. Also, promoting rigorous meaning and curriculum. You know, we've been doing a lot of work around our curriculum, making sure that whatever we do, we always have high standards and high expectations for all of our students, and making sure that we're developing, again, those social, emotional skills so that they can achieve and contribute to the community around them. And also applying and evaluating our policies and practices and outcomes. We know that every month, Ms. Schaefer has our policy meetings, and a lot of you attend them. We're always looking at it, making sure that students and families are treated fairly, and that they have access to supportive learning environments, and that we are making sure that we have high quality educational opportunities for all students so that they can achieve and be excellent in everything that they do. Next slide, please. So again, SEL, DEIB, just wanted to ground some of this. We're prioritizing SEL for the educators, for the families, for our community, for our students, so that we can, again, all work together. And again, at the end of this presentation, we'll have an opportunity to talk about how this looks and what else we can do to make Lower Merion great. So next slide. And Mr. Marta, I believe you're up.
I am. Thank you. So just take a second and read this quick quote. In the district, we are not all about academics. We are about the health, welfare, and growth of all of our children, physically, mentally, emotionally. And this quote from the National Association of School Psychologists kind of encompasses our work and that we embedded all across the district. Next slide. So if we think about the whole child, as I just mentioned, let's talk about the three main components of it. We know that research has found strong links between well-being and the academic performance and the feelings about school. If students feel good about their school, about going to school, and they feel about safe, that they are able to learn and extend themselves further. So finding joy, we hope to help our students that we offer them opportunities for socialization, building community, activities, fun, physical, and to help them grow physically, mentally, and emotionally strong. In developing social and emotional skills, we hope to increase their self-esteem and self-confidence. We hope that students begin to build relationships that are critical throughout their lives, through peers, through their teachers, through older students, students who perceive more emotional support from teachers, have a greater school satisfaction, academic competence, and better social skills. And we also try to teach all of our students how to manage the stressors in their lives, how to recognize them, and to use the tools that we give them in their toolbox throughout their lives so that they can navigate times when they're not feeling so good. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit, or look a little bit further at stress, trauma, and impact of COVID-19. Dr. Walker?
Sure thing. So when we're looking at some of the challenges that students are facing, we want to talk about what they're dealing with so we can help them build those skills to manage those stressors and challenges. So as Mr. Marta just said, so 3 major stressors we were looking at, or challenges we were looking at, are stress, history of trauma, and while we don't want to continue to emphasize too hard the impact of COVID, we know that we're still facing sort of residual impact of COVID. So it's something we want to acknowledge. Next slide, please. So there are lots of different examples of stresses that our students can face, our students and families, really. And some of these are caused by negative events and some are caused by positive events, right? So we can have positive and negative stressors. Either way, they still kind of put that tax on our students, systems as they approach school every day. So some of the negative events that can cause stress are school or work pressure, conflicts in relationships or friendships. Sometimes if there's financial problems in the home, that can cause our students and family stress, or maybe personal illness or family illness or experiences of loss. There are also positive events that can cause stress for our students and families. Students might be starting new relationships or friendships. Parents may be getting new jobs. Students might be getting jobs. Planning things, celebrations, holidays, or even going on vacation can be sources of stress for our students. So we want to teach them, coping skills to deal with both positive and negative stressors. Next slide, please. So just to touch briefly on, residual impacts of COVID. So obviously that caused a disruption, increase of stress for our students, some isolation. And there were lots of factors there that some of our students are continuing to experience sort of the residual impact from, whether that be that loss of social for whatever phase of their social development that may have been and what kind of gaps we see there. It's something that we want to continue to keep in mind as we approach social emotional learning with our students. Next slide, please. The other piece that we always want to keep in mind is keeping in mind the trauma that our students may bring to the table. So sometimes we sort of use stressed and traumatized sort of interchangeably, but they really are very different. So trauma occurs when a person has a real threat to their life or bodily integrity, or it could be a real threat to the life or bodily integrity of a loved one. And this causes an overwhelming sense and a shock to our nervous system that produces senses of terror, horror, helplessness, or fear. And it can really impact how we react to situations in the future. Next slide, please. All right, so this graphic shows some of the examples of traumatic events that can affect children. So we have statistics that 2 out of 3 children report at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. This can affect their learning and their behavior. So we want to teach them coping skills and resilience factors to help them fight against that. 1 in 4 children will have experienced or witnessed one traumatic event by their 4th birthday. So it's pretty common. And so when we think of trauma, it's something that exists in the lives of the students that we see every day. And so we want to make sure when we're approaching social emotional learning that we're keeping sort of trauma-informed strategies in mind. Next slide. A term that you might have all heard as ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. And this came out of a study in the 1990s. And it's really told us a lot about how these adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, can impact everything from health to academic performance and psychological factors for our students and our families. And it's really brought a lot of sort of awareness to our healthcare and our school settings. And there's a lot of links there. So we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind these ACEs and these experiences that our students are bringing to the table when we're structuring our social emotional supports and our social emotional learning in school. Next slide. So when we talk about ACEs and trauma with children, there's various impacts. So there's a neurological impact, like when I talked earlier about how it actually impacts our body and our nervous system. Like it can add to deficits in memory, and it can cause us to overreact to stimuli in the environment. So you could be hypervigilant, and it can impact your ability to moderate stress. And your body and brain will react very intensely to situations, even that when they might not warrant that level of response. There's also a psychological impact. We see increases in anxiety or social anxiety, depression. We can even see suicidal ideation or aggressive behaviors. And this also can impact our students academically. It can cause difficulties with reading, math, achievement scores, and they might get higher discipline referrals as well. Okay, next slide, and I believe I'm kicking it back to Mr. Marta for a second.
Yes, when we look at or talk about trauma, we have to understand that trauma is not stress. Stress can either be positive or negative, but trauma is almost always negative. Trauma is caused by either threat of life, bodily injury, or something that may affect a loved one. It could also be perceived as any threat at all, and then taken in and developed into trauma. Can a single event, it could be a single event such as sexual abuse or violence, maybe a shooting, a sudden death of an unexpected loved one, or an intrusive medical procedure that might change a person's life or lifestyle. It could be prolonged or temporary child abuse. It could be peer-to-peer, adult on a child. It comes and shows us its ugly self in many different ways. Trauma is always overwhelming physically and emotionally to the person. It creates fear, anxiety, stress. It could even be caused by natural disasters or experiences that students had with possible close calls of weather or storms. It could be the effect of racism or bias, an act of terrorism, or the development of mental illness and all of its stereotypes that people put on it, should someone start to develop attributes of mental illness. It affects every aspect of our life. It could be from severe physical or emotional distress to the system, our bodies. It could be overeating, undereating, over-exercising, under-exercising. It comes out in many, many different ways. So it could potentially affect even our physical functioning, to the point where we don't come to school able to learn at all. We just come with an overwhelming sense of emotionality and fear and anxiousness, which prohibits a student from ever possibly taking in what is being taught or presented in front of them. Next slide, please. So the consequences and prevalence could be long-term, could be short-term. It could be directly related to ACEs. It could be due to risky behavior, thoughts of suicide, substance abuse. It could come again, as I mentioned earlier, anything physical, either from the outcome or for lack of physical activity. And it's just not in our community. It is in every single community across the country and across the world. As we see in all the wars that are going across the world right now, not to mention most recently, the fear that the people in Haiti are living with, the war in Afghanistan always for many years now, and the prolonged war in Croatia, and again, can't think of the other country, I'm sorry. In any case, what do we do? What do we teach? How do we get around this? How do we support our students? Next slide, please. Resilience is one of the things that we try to instill in students, how to bounce back, how to feel good about themselves, how to change their self-talk, how they can do something for someone and have a good effect on themselves and the other person. We try to not only do this in what we teach, but we try to do this in examples. We have many activities that I'll go over later that we try to offer our students in our buildings. So the idea is that we try to get kids to release or at least let go for a time all of their anxiousness, all of their stress and trauma if they have it, so that they can come into our schools, they can be welcomed, they can feel good about themselves, and then they can take in the education that's being exposed to them. Next slide. Dr. Walker?
Of course. So one thing that's really cool about resilience, so as Mr. Marta was talking about, we have all these strategies. We want to help our students build resilience, and it's something that it's a skill that can be developed and honed, and it's almost like a muscle that you have to exercise. So a lot of people with strong resilience have been through some stress or some trauma, but there are ways to develop our students' resilience, which is really exciting. So one of the big parts of that is building strong relationships with peers and adults, but also being part of supportive social groups, self-care strategies, maintaining a positive outlook, and being able to accept change. But all of those skills kind of fit into the frameworks that we try to foster with the social emotional learning that we provide in our schools, so that kids can develop that resilience, so that they can handle typical levels of stress and can bounce back from those minor traumas. Next slide. So with all of this in mind, so we've now talked about a lot of the challenges that our students are facing. Now we want to talk about what that social emotional learning looks like in Lower Merion. So next slide. So the primary center of all of this is building that connection and trust. So building those positive relationships from peer to peer, from peer to staff, and with families included as well. We want to make sure that our students have those positive relationships, because those relationships are where we're going to build that trust, build that connection, and that can be the biggest agent of change as we look to how to positively support our students. Next slide. I think I'm kicking. Oh, sorry, one more slide from me. Sorry about that. All right, so one of the things we look at is making sure we have social emotional safety for our students and our staff at the top of our priority list. So we want to make sure that staff are educated, recognizing signs of trauma, and really being trauma informed in their support of students, and as we're promoting these social emotional learning strategies. We want to make sure that everyone's social emotional needs are met, and we're integrating that trauma informed practice. And the last is that we're examining how things are going, and we're making sure that our procedures and our ways of providing feedback to students aren't unnecessarily or unintentionally re-traumatizing them. So really taking those trauma informed approaches and integrating those into how we approach our social emotional learning strategies. Next slide.
Yeah. So 1 out of every 4 children attending school have been exposed to some sort of traumatic experience that affected either their learning or their behavior. Each year, educators work at teaching students who have been dealing with this, and some of the ways that we do that are through the things that we're going to talk about a little later. But you wouldn't be able to tell what these students look like or who they are, what their experience, because of course it's their feelings and it's their emotionality and it's what they're thinking. So promoting trauma-sensitive schools, we need to approach the greatest potential to positively impact students regardless of their history, their experiences. We hope to touch each child in a way that we can develop their strengths and their coping skills. Because there is a direct relationship between adverse childhood experiences and academic performance, we need to acknowledge in schools the ways to incorporate priorities of health, wellness, and safety so that learning can happen. Next slide. So the CDC and SMAHS identified 6 guiding principles of a trauma-informed approach, and we worked with this model with our staff. In a minute, I'll be going quickly over each of the principles and the strategies that we use. Well, some of these principles may appear very basic and consistent with our current practices. It's important that we need to reinforce these principles with our students and our teachers. First of all is safety. It refers to whether the child or the adult would feel physically safe where they're located. Establish clear, positive stated behavioral expectations, model self-control. Remember that nonverbal communication, like facial expressions, are just as important as somebody speaking out loud. We need to provide explicit positive reinforcement. We need to be mindful to avoid harsh consequences when somebody has been affected by trauma. We need to develop trustworthiness and transparency, which refers to maintaining trust with students, families, faculty, staff, and the school community. We need to build proactively connections of trust between students and parents and the school. We need to be clear and consistent on how to respond to behavioral concerns. It is important that we thoughtfully respond to those student behaviors that challenge us, and not to react or overreact to a situation. We need to offer and encourage peer support. It's critical in establishing safety, hope, building trust, and enhancing collaboration while a student is in school. We need to foster strong relationships through collaborative learning. We need to teach social interpersonal skills as ways to seek and advocate for the students to seek and advocate support for themselves. Some children may need extra support, and we do that in small groups. We need to teach patience. We need to be able to, as teachers and educators, read our students' nonverbal clues, and we need to help students socially navigate the classroom setting. We need to collaborate, which requires organizing the difference between the power that an educator may have with its students. We need to work constantly to foster family collaboration with our schools. This needs to be in a very supportive ways of, what are you doing in the home? This is what we're doing in school. What can we do to help each other? What do you find successful? What are you finding not successful? We need to look at best practices about behavioral responses. We need to share power amongst administrators, teachers, and parents. We need to learn to empower and give voice to our students. We need to foster belief that students are the reason that we are here, and that their success is our success as teachers, as administrators, as families. We need to create spaces that give students and families a voice to be heard. We need to allow our students to be able to set goals, and we need to set positive reinforcement steps along the way so that they feel successful as they're trying to obtain those goals. We need to empower students by teaching problem-solving skills and help to support them to empower each other as they are going through them at the different development stages and grade levels. We need to be culturally, historically, and genderly aware of the differences in our students. We need to keep, as a district, to continue to learn and to be professionally developed in these areas, and go beyond our own cultural proficiencies and equities to learn about others. We need to have a system of practices that are fair and equitable to everybody. Next slide. So what do we do when we talk about social emotional learning in our schools? At the elementary level, We have responsive classroom where we participate in morning meetings. And then some other time during the day, our elementary students participate in a period called WIN, and it's What I Need, be it enrichment or enhancement or support and remediation. We have a team of teachers, administrators that come together to look at ways that we can support students in different ways, inside the classroom, outside the classroom, behaviorally or academically. And that group together is called our achievement team. We look at ways that best practices that we know that can support our students. And then we also always invite the parents in so that we can work together. As I had mentioned earlier, what works at home, what doesn't work at home, what works at school, what do we see, an exchange of information and ideas. We, at the elementary level, we offer the Separate Step program, which is an emotional and empathy learning, social emotional curriculum. It is taught by our teachers and supported by our counselors. All of our elementary schools have school families. That's when we break down the larger school into smaller groups or a larger class into smaller classes or a larger grade, all the grades into smaller groups. All the adults in the elementary building, regardless if you're a teacher with a PhD or you're the custodian, everybody has a group of students that they meet with. 6 to 8 students typically, all across all grades. They come together, they meet each other. They try to stay together until the student is promoted out and goes to 5th grade, so that new students coming in are welcomed by a group that are familiar with each other, and they stay together over the years. What they do is they come together, they might work on a project, they might play a simple game, they might just tell a story about an event that was positive in the past season or the past month. They do a lot of different activities that brings the kids together at cross grade levels with an adult that they may or may not have every day, but they might see every once in a while. And the kids love this. They come together. They look forward to it. It's met with great success. We have cultural proficiency and anti-racism curriculums throughout our elementary school. We have lessons throughout the year. We send a counseling newsletter quarterly to all parents in our elementary schools, and all of our elementary schools practice the habits of mind that are reinforced both in morning meeting, win time, second step. It's a concept and themes that we use to reinforce skills that kids should have. An example would be resilience. The kids are able to talk about it. Teachers will use it over and over throughout the day in their classrooms. When we have a second step lesson where an example of a student might be that they had a bad outcome, and a friend or an adult would say, well, how can you turn that around? We would all know to use the word resilient, so it's familiar with the kids and it's part of a habit of mind. And we connect all those dots and we reinforce that over and over again. Next slide. The middle level, we have our student assistant referral team, which is START. That's any student can either self-refer themselves, or a friend can refer, or a parent can refer, or a teacher can refer. Any student that they might feel is struggling with emotionally or potentially struggling with drug or alcohol abuse. We also have Form at Walsh Valley and Rally at BC. And forgive me because I couldn't put it in because I don't remember what it's called at Black Rock. In any case, they each have advisory groups similar to school families, but a little bit bigger, where they come together throughout the year. And kids are mixed up in the different grades, across grades, and they do projects together, and they might discuss a topic or maybe a current event. And it's always done with the lens of having the students work together in collaboration, and to foster student voice as well as participation in a non-academic collaborative space. Again, the middle school counselors also do a newsletter to the parents that goes out quarterly. We partner with outside agencies to help support us from time to time, also come in and do lessons. We have small group lessons with specific topics. It might be the death of a loved one in a family. We've had groups where we try to instill or reinforce lessons that were done, either form and rally. It might be anger management. It might be thoughtful speech. It might be participating on a more positive or having a more positive attitude to participate more actively in our middle school and our elementary schools, as well as our high schools. You'll see we all participate in restorative practices, which is allowing the student to acknowledge what they do wrong. And we acknowledge that also. But first, the first attempt is to understand what has happened before an explanation or a consequence can be determined. And then if possible, and not all the time, but if possible, restorative practice gives the opportunity for the offender to make some sort of amends. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is a very hopeful ending to sometimes to some of the things that happens in our schools amongst and between students. Next slide. At our high school, we have advisories which meet once every 4 days. There are grade level meetings or PLCs with each grade level. We have orientation for 9th graders that start in midsummer and goes through the first week of school. All of our high school students participate in Lunch and Learn, which gives them downtime out of their classes where they can meet as a group for an activity, or they can sit with their friends. It also gives them the opportunity to meet with their teachers should they want something reinforced or re-explained or made up something that they missed. We offer safe spaces in the school for students who feel that they are not like others. We offer small group counseling with specific topics, as I mentioned a little earlier. In the past and throughout last year, we've offered coffee and conversations with our psychologists so that parents and students have an opportunity to ask some questions that they normally might not have or see the psychologist in the building, so that we can develop some skills.
Hi. Okay, okay.
Right from our school psychologists that sit in the buildings. And over the past few years, we have developed student wellness days where we give options to students to participate in several relaxing, calming, fun activities. They can choose to stay in class, or they can choose to participate in an activity. And that's done a few times throughout the school year. Shawana?
Thank you, Mr. Marta. And I know that that was a lot. I want to go to the next slide. So, and we can go back to the upcoming events in a few. So we were going to do breakout rooms, but I know it took a little bit longer. So we're just going to have an open conversation about what ideas stood out for you. First, we'll give our board members that are on an opportunity to ask questions. And then we get ask the community and all of you that are here, what ideas stood out for you and why, and what parts of the presentation would you like to explore more and learn about in future presentations. One thing that Megan always shares, Ms. Schaefer always talks about, and it resonates with me, is how everything that we do is connected. And so maybe you won't hear it in this form, but you may hear it in another presentation with another part of our, you may hear it in our social wellness committee meetings, or you may hear it in one of our committee meetings or ISC when we're talking about belonging next month. So this is an ongoing conversation. And so we wanted to give some background as well as provide an opportunity for you to see some of the things, because it's not lost on me, as I always say, that parents aren't always able to see these things and the community doesn't always get a chance. So first we'll give any of our board members that are on an opportunity to ask the questions that they have, and then about the presentation. And then we will open it up to the community and everyone that's on about the presentation on what stood out for you, why, what parts of the presentation do you want to learn more about or explore? And then we'll turn it over to Dr. Yanni and the board to close us out. So board members first.
So I thank you very much for the presentation and for all the detail. One thing that I'm kind of, I guess, confused about a little bit is it seems like the concept of social emotional learning is kind of conflated with trauma informed care. And I'm not, from everything I understand it, they aren't the same thing. And I'm curious if you can, so like with the morning meetings, for example, in elementary school, the check-ins, I'm curious like what the tenor of those meetings is, because I'm a little bit worried, I guess, that there's an emphasis on identifying trauma where it may or may not, may not be, and sort of over kind of reducing things down to trauma informed care where it really doesn't apply, if that makes sense. So if you can expound on that, that would be great.
Dr.
Sure.
Walker, do you want to answer that, Dr. Walker?
I'm happy to speak. I think Mr. Marta was about to say something to it. No, I don't. I just don't want to interrupt him. I'm happy to speak to it as well. Mr. Marta, do you want to go first?
Sure.
And then maybe I can fill in.
So yeah, thank you. So great question, great clarification. So I think my message want to be is that we've done a lot of work in the student services, with the student services staff in training, our psychs, our counselors, our social workers, our nurses, to identify and to be aware. We've also extended that training to all faculty and aides. We just want students, teachers, educators, to just be more sensitive and aware to any signs as signal. Morning meeting is a very different activity. It is a time to welcome students. It's one of the pillars is that everybody gets to hear their name at least once or twice during that time, so that students feel validated or they know that their classmates are aware of who they are. When they share similar experiences, they participate in all sorts of either hand signal or one easy quick clap, which reinforces, yes, I'm being heard, and yes, so many more people are like me. So morning meeting it's not an instructional time. It's more of a sharing time, more of a developmental time. There is a component with it where they do have a message. The teacher puts a message on the board. It might be today we're having a math test, so let's all do our best and let's support each other because we're all math specialists. It's something very positive. It might be something reinforced related to maybe a current event. It's Veterans Day. Let us think about all of those people that served our country to give us, the freedom that we have. And then it's, as practical as, and then there's a part that's very practical. It takes the lunch count, so it welcomes everybody. They can tell a story. They might even work in a group on a problem or solution-based question. And then there's the message, and then they go practice something, and then they come back and they start their class.
Shayna?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So I had sort of a thought, something that occurred to me, and then a question. So the thing that occurred to me was I've sat in a lot of these meetings over the course of these years, and we talk a lot about restorative practices. And I'm always kind of surprised when I hear parents say, my kids don't know anything about restorative practices. They're never encouraged. But I think what it is, as Mr. Marta, you were talking about the words that they're using with the kids, that it's just that it's not presented necessarily to the students as restorative justice. And so I think if the team could think about using that as an intro to sort of explaining that to some of our parents and the folks that are really interested in that particular aspect of our school practice, that might be a good entry point for something that has had a bit of a disconnect in the past. And my question is sort of how we approach trauma-informed care for topics that are part of the curriculum that might be understandably upsetting to some of our students. I'm thinking about when we have the Holocaust, when we talk about Stonewall riots, when we talk about human enslavement of Africans in this country. Like, there are students for whom that can be very traumatic, but that doesn't mean we can't teach those things. Like, we have to teach those things. And so I'm curious how that lens is used by our educators to teach those potentially painful topics.
So I'll dive in. So the first thing is, the educator needs to be aware that that's a potential, right? There's a potential of a trigger. There's a potential of somebody establishing a connection to something that they've happened or that they believed happened in their lives. And if it is, gives them time and space in the moment, maybe to tell their story, maybe to sit quietly and not have them address anything. If it's something probably maybe a little bit prolonged and they don't understand, the teacher will just go over and say, is there something I can do for you? Instead of saying, you need to participate. Part of all that is how we ask questions and how sensitive we are to addressing the student. So it might say, do you need time? Do you need to step out? Do you want to talk to me personally? Do you want to talk to me privately? Do you want to write me a note? It's safe to say that I think, teachers know their students fairly well, particularly when they're going to talk about sensitive situations, or maybe situations that are going to bring back memories or thoughts. What we've done a lot administratively is to try to work with teachers to recognize, hear, and understand those triggers or those emotions or those facial expressions, so that they don't deepen any wound, or that they don't create a situation that's embarrassing or emotional in the classroom.
So is part of that education also communicating with teachers that they shouldn't be asking any student to sort of stand in for, like, to offer their experience as a marginalized person in that thing? I mean, I'm thinking of not pleasant things that have happened, but like, teacher, if you're teaching about a certain thing and you're asking the one kid that's part of that marginalized group to speak up about their feelings about that thing in the public, is that part of what our teachers are getting trained in?
Absolutely.
Great.
And, cold calling on a student is not anything that we try to emphasize. I just hope that, through what we've been able to share and train our teachers in, is that they're a little bit more aware and more sensitive to reading the situation.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thanks. Thank you for the presentation. I had more of a specific question regarding how SEL is integrated into WIN and Lunch and Learn. My understanding was that both of those are more academic geared. So I was just curious as to how SEL comes into play with those two specific periods of time.
Well, the fact that students at Lunch and Learn can engage freely with each other, go about the building. They're not sent to the cafeteria. They can go to the gym. They can go to the library. They can sit in the hall. Many of them sit in the hall in their friend groups. So it's really the idea that they have time to just bring everything down and disassociate, unless they want to bring it up, with academics. Lunch and Learn is more about bringing down and giving a break in a day for a student than it is about getting support. It's just a opportunity that students can take academic support. It's not a requirement. We have tried in the past, students who have failed, who are failing, a course or two or three. We try to bring them together and try to have them work with teachers. But they don't have to go, because we're only trying to help them. I mean, there's not like, if we schedule a kid to go with the teacher, for math for 2 days, and the student goes the first day but doesn't go the second day, they don't get penalized for not going with the teacher. They're just not advocating for themselves the way they're supposed to. And when it goes in different times, it's there's a lot of creativity with WIN. Sometimes teachers will pull students who have I'm going to make this up. Maybe a group of students are interested in poetry because they just finished the unit, and kids want to continue to practice poetry. So one of the teachers might say, okay, students who are interested in writing more poetry or sharing their poetry, they can come to my room during WIN this time. It is also for catch up, remediation, and enrichment, but it does other things too.
I would just add that for Lunch and Learn, I think there's also a lot of opportunities for students to extend their learning or to experience things that complement or supplement the core curriculum. You know, sometimes there's speakers in during that time. There's some clubs and organizations that meet at that time. So while it is downtime, I think it's valuable time, and it's something that we've been talking with the high school principals about, tightening up a little bit, not making it so structured that we lose some of that social feel, but that how can we be strategic about tightening it up a little bit, that students that might need some support, whether it's academically, behaviorally, et cetera, get that support so that it will lead to better academic outcomes, so that they're better prepared to, attend class and really be present in class.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins?
Yes, one of the things that I found as teaching school was that several students came to school hungry. And I think even though in a middle income community, very busy parents rushing around, and I wonder what is done about giving children extra food if they need it if they come to school hungry.
That's a great question, Ruth. This year and for the last couple of years, breakfast has been free, provided by the state. So it's universal free breakfast. And we do see participation rates go up at certain times. I know Black Rock Middle School, a group of students actually came up with the idea of creating, serving stations throughout the school. So it even made it easier for students to get breakfast. And, I would say a moderate percentage of our students participate in the free breakfast program. And it to be determined if universal free breakfast remains in place, but I think that's been a big win across our entire state.
And the last ISC meeting, Mo presented on the piloting of the breakfast carts for the grab and go that's started at Black Rock and will be instituted in other schools as well, so that if students are coming late, they can also get grab and go breakfast. Tali, I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very interesting to hear. I guess I have a few questions, but I was wondering how much of this, curriculum is proactive. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware recently a large portion of our community has suffered trauma, and how is the district handling that? Is that being handled proactively, or are you waiting for incidents to occur? What is the process?
I think that's a great question. There are some short-term things and some longer-term things that we're working on. So in the short term, we've been doing some advisory lessons at the high schools, are doing, and the middle schools are doing. And then in terms of some longer-term planning, and by longer term, I mean, as curriculum changes as we go into next year. There's curriculum revisions happening in social studies. We're also looking at making sure that we're actually teaching topics and preparing teachers to teach topics where they, where they feel not only comfortable but confident in teaching the content, so that our kids get, a better experience and a better understanding of the world. And as Mr. Marta answered the question earlier. I think it was Mrs. Kalish who asked the question. Like, we don't ever want a student that's part of a group that experienced trauma to be the bearer of the instruction around that trauma for other students. So being really sensitive to the fact that that our teachers are aware of that and that we don't put kids in that situation.
Could you explain about the advisory lessons? What did you mean by that?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So advisory lessons. So in our advisories at middle school and high school, there are lessons on hate speech, discrimination, bias, and then that's leading into lessons on anti-Semitism, given the current climate, so that students understand what anti-Semitism is, how to face it or how to combat it. And then we've been having conversations among the leadership team about, how do we continue to create and sustain conditions in our buildings where we don't allow anti-Semitism to take hold in our buildings and, to fester. So trying to cut that off at the pass. And the only way that we're going to do that really is around education and instruction.
What about the elementary schools? Those are not.
Right now, we're in the process of building lessons using developmentally appropriate materials. And so I anticipate being able to give a much more substantive update in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Is all hearts, everyone get an opportunity to ask their question? I know we're a little past our time. If everyone...
Can I just, Sean, I'm sorry, can I just,
I was gonna
so, I think Mr. Marta did a good job of explaining morning meeting. I'll speak. I'm a former responsive classroom trainer, and having been trained in level 1 and level 2 of responsive classroom, and then actually going out and training people, and then having been an elementary teacher myself, that morning meeting is all about building community, right? Because, at the beginning of the meeting, I said, for kids and staff to do a good job in school, we need everyone to feel like they matter. And I can tell you firsthand, whether I was teaching 2nd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade, the power of that morning meeting in building that community where kids get to not only learn about each other, but share their experiences. It is almost exclusively very positive and productive, and it sets a really good tone. And I can, I think back to some of the most vivid memories from when I was teaching came from morning meeting, right? Because it allows everyone that's part of that morning meeting to learn about one another. And I think over the years, when I would have kids that would be at odds with each other, the morning meeting and learning about each other and developing familiarity with each other is really what created bonds between kids and worked out close, any type of interpersonal gaps that might have been there. And the same thing to Mrs. Kalish's point about restorative practices. I think hit the nail on the head. I think we don't say to kids, this is restorative practices. So I think if we're more mindful of that and more mindful about that as we present and talk about that in the future, I think that will build some better shared understandings. So.
Thank you, Dr. Yanni. Ms. Buckman, do you want to share our 2 upcoming events that's coming up soon before we close out? And I turn it back over to Abby or to Shayla.
Sure. I don't have the slides, so I'm hoping I remember what I put on there. But we have upcoming on, and I don't have the dates in front of me without the slide, but I believe
can you show the slide, Alexis, please?
April 16th is the SAGE conference. SAGE is Students Advocating for General Equality. There are SAGE clubs at both high schools, and they come together. Okay. Yep. Oh. I didn't even have that on here, but we're going to talk about it anyway. They come together, and it's a totally student-run day of workshops. It's usually about 100 kids from each high school. This year it'll be at Harriton, and the students picked topics, things like transgender rights, disability rights, how to be an activist, how to be an advocate. And they run workshops, peer workshops for one another throughout the day. And each student can, if they're not running a workshop, they attend 2 workshops, and then there's usually a culminating event or speaker. So that's coming up. April 9th is our GSIB, which stands for Gender, Sexuality, Inclusivity, and Belonging Reading Night. It used to be called Jazz and Friends, but it's a night where we invite students and their families from elementary and middle schools. This year it'll be at Ballackinwood Middle School. And it's a night of reading and celebrating books that feature LGBTQ plus and TGD characters. TGD is transgender and gender diverse. And in addition to the reading of the books, Children's Book World will be there. They'll be selling some of the books for families that want to bring them home. And then the high school students are going to be leading a panel for middle school students that are upcoming, so that the middle school students for whom this is a concern can learn a little bit about what it's like to be an LGBTQ or gender diverse student in our high schools. So there'll be a panel of students who belong to the AGSA, which is All Gender and Sexuality Alliance, a lot of alphabet here. Doing that panel, and the middle school students will be able to ask them questions. And we find that, again, that's a way of welcoming and ensuring a sense of belonging for those students, especially as they look ahead to the transition from middle to high school. And then finally, on May 9th is our ELD, that's English Language Development. More alphabet, family night that will take place at Lower Merion High School. And this is when students who are in our ELD program and their families are invited to spend a fun night together. And so they get to meet families who may share a language and culture, whose children go to different schools. And the theme this year is going to be Olympics. So the kids will be taking part in activities to win medals. And while the kids are doing that, there's also a resource fair in the cafeteria. And we have representatives from the township and the county and food banks and childcare centers and all sorts of resources that might be helpful to those families, all in one place at one time. And we're very excited to have we have a group that we've put together of volunteer translators, people who have been here a little longer and know English and know our school system, who will be there to sort of act as translators and mentors for some of the families that are newer to our community, and basically be there and answer questions. And we have, how to fill out free and reduced lunch forms, and what do you need to do if your kid wants to play sports? And so providing that resource. So these are all different events that are upcoming to help build that sense of belonging in the district.
Thank you, Ms. Buckman. I will turn it over to Abby or Shayna, and I thank you all for being a part of this very important conversation and giving up of your time. Thank you to Dr. Walker and to Mr. Marta, Dr. Yanni, and thank you to Alexis, Dr. McGloin for advancing our slides, and to you, our wonderful community, for being a part of the conversation. I'll turn it back over to our board committee members. Leaders.
Thank you so much, everybody. Shane, I'm gonna take it from here.
You do it great.
I think this is our last meeting of the year. Am I correct?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody who's been part of the committee for all of the work that's gone into it. And we will, I guess, touch base at the next board meeting. Maybe we'll see everybody there in April, which is I have to pull up my calendar, but it's April. I want to say it's 8th. Is that correct? Or is that the curriculum meeting? There is a board meeting on April 8th. I don't know if it's the general board meeting.
The 8th is curriculum.
Yeah, that's our curriculum meeting, April 8th.
Okay.
The 15th is the one you're thinking of, is the business board meeting.
The general, yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see everyone there, whoever can make it. Thank you very much, and have a good night.